Welcome back to another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. Welcome to, in my opinion, the best place to learn how to do business better, all because we focus on those actionable, practical strategies rather than the fluff, rather than the inspirational quotes, rather than the things that you might find on social media. We really drill down to the things you need to know that people often aren't always talking about. Now, I'm your host, Blake Benz. I've been doing the podcast for about 5 years now, 400 episodes. It's an incredible place to talk entrepreneurship and business. And one of the things we do on the show is we like to bring on amazing guests who can talk about their sweet spot, the things that they know, and really their story of entrepreneurship and running businesses at scale. Today's no different. We have an amazing guest on the podcast today. We have Jacob Frese on the show, where typically when I bring a guest on, I say, hey, here's the business that they run. Well, this isn't the case with Jacob. He actually runs several businesses. In fact, he's been a serial entrepreneur since he was 15 years old, and he's worked in a number of different industries across different categories. You may know him from Frese Industries. You may know him as the president of Barnett's Dairyette. You may know him as the president of Frese Fireworks. You may even know him as the president of Slate Gap Signs here in Northwest Arkansas. There's all sorts of things that he's doing, which is why I'm so excited to get some of his good advice on what does it mean to do business well. Stay tuned. Before we dive in, we do have a word from one of the amazing businesses that sponsor the podcast. Of course, if you've thought about advertising on the podcast, you can always reach out at blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. And don't forget, if you enjoy the podcast, feel free to give us a follow and give us a review on the show. Really appreciate it. All that to say, we'll be right back. Talk soon. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all of this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more. Jacob, it's so great to have you on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have someone on the podcast who, honestly, I feel very grateful that you've made time for me today, because I know you have, you're so much a glutton for punishment that you don't have just one business. You have a multitude of businesses.
Yes.
And you're one of our local business owners. And so it's great to have you on and just, talk a little bit about the journey of entrepreneurship and running businesses at scale. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on.
Yeah. Well, let's, for the audience's sake, and we had our intro at the start of the episode, but welcoming you on the show. Obviously you're running Frese Industries. What all is entailed under that umbrella term?
Yeah, under the umbrella. So I have my restaurant, Barnett's Dairyette. It is
Siloam Springs.
Yep. It's been around since 1957. I'm the third owner.
Wow.
I've owned it for just over 6 years now. I have Frese Fireworks.
Yes.
Very excited about that. I'm really working on growing that business. We have been around for 5 years. I have Frese Construction, which is a fairly new company for me, although I grew up in construction. I haven't done anything in the last 20 years in that business for myself. And so embarking on building spec homes. So really excited about that. Have a couple of other...
Do you just get bored? Like tell me. I just think about myself. Like, running one business is grueling. You just named three. And by the way, for our listeners, these aren't like, we're not talking like Barnett's Dairyette, was that the name?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not talking about Jacob's like garage where like someone pulls up and he opens up the deep freeze. Oh yeah, right. Here you go. Like these are legitimate businesses that are all doing really well. I mean, how do you do that?
So I definitely have ADHD, no doubt, self-diagnosed, of course. And I actually literally, I was waiting on a Zoom call the other day, had a few extra minutes, and I decided I'm going to actually write down a list of the companies because honestly, I literally sometimes forget. Of course, I have a couple of shell companies, we do that for tax purposes. But I actually ended up adding some that are in the pipeline, and I'm at 11. With 3 in the pipeline. And so,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We don't know each other well enough for me to like razz you, but because I would be like jokingly being like, why do you hate yourself? But, I mean, you've obviously found like a system that works for you. I mean, I'm really curious, like week to week, and we'll get into more of the details of this as we get farther in the conversation, but like in a given week, like how do you manage this? Like, is it like, okay, this week I'm focusing on this business? Is it like, do you break it down like by day? Like, is it just kind of like how things pop up and it's like, I want to work on this today? I mean, I'm just very curious your process with all of this.
Yeah. So, definitely blessed to have a great management team at my restaurant. That is first and foremost, because, if they were not, part of my team, then I would be fixed to 4 walls every day. And so that is very integral part of my business. All my businesses. As far as what do I decide I'm going to work on, you definitely get curveballs thrown at you, no doubt. I have tried time blocking on certain things. You read about a lot of like Elon Musk and all these other guys that do time blocking. And so I do attempt to do that. But again, curveballs constantly. Like, I got a refrigerator that went down at my restaurant, like we got to like figure this out,
Yeah, I had a really busy day and my wife knocked on the door because I work from home and I was like, yeah, what's going on? And she was like, I need you to see this. And my daughter had put a bead up her nose, like a little tiny bead.
Oh no.
Which by the way, I just got to tell you, I got a bone to pick with my local church because they keep giving her like very small objects. And I'm like, people, please. But they had given her a bracelet and she had taken it apart. She had put the bead up her nose because, why not, right? She's an innovator. And sure enough, I could see it all the way up at the top of her nose. And this was like around the middle of the day. We did not get home until like 9:00 at night. So when you say curveballs, I mean, this is a norm in the business world. Is every day you run the risk of, is my day going to get hijacked? But so you had a fridge go down.
Yeah.
And
which, it happens. I mean, we've had a fridge go down before. And so then we got to like get a game plan. Like, are we going to get a service tech out there? I mean, things are throwaways these days. I mean, these are reach-in coolers, not like walk-in coolers. And so it's like, are we going to get a tech out there? Is it really worth our time? So, trying to weigh all those options, because obviously you don't want to spend $400 on a refrigerator that costs $1,300 when you can get, it's 5 years old, you get all brand new seals and, everything.
And are you, I'm so curious because I've noticed like people who are more seasoned business owners, like there's sort of like a gut check or like fast calculations that happen. Like are these things that are just like instantly firing off in the back of your mind?
Yes.
That's just incredible. I mean, I love that too, because we talk a lot. I posted today on social media about the overnight success story and how it doesn't exist and how it's, you're going to be in a grueling process to run your business. But one of the things I mentioned was you can't learn the nuance of what it means to run a business overnight. Excuse me. Excuse me. And that's one of the examples of what I'm talking about is all of those calculations and decisions and, long-term planning. I mean, you made that in a moment, but I mean, maybe you could be like a business savant for all I know. Day one for me of running my business, I would not have even thought about those things.
Yeah. And it comes with experience. So, before this restaurant, I owned another restaurant up in Southeast Kansas for 6 years. So as an owner, I've been in the restaurant business for 12 of the last 15 years, or I guess 12 of the last 20 years. And then I grew up in, as an employee in restaurants and working full service and fast food. So definitely comes with, lots of years of experience for sure.
When COVID happened, was this, I mean, you're thinking about a business that is largely shut down. I mean, it's, almost out of business, technically, the restaurant industry, for better lack of a better phrasing. What was your thinking through that time?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting times. There was no making fast decisions then. It was, take your time, make calculated decisions, and do it, for the good of your family, for the good of your employees' family. Thank goodness they didn't shut down. We have counter service, not full service. So thank goodness they didn't shut down us entirely, but adding processes and extra staff to make it happen.
It's so interesting too, talking about this I'm trying not to get too vague or ambiguous here, but like that expertise of knowing when to make a gut decision versus I need to simmer on this one a little bit more.
Yeah. And
I think it's dangerous when you mix the two up. And then on the flip side, even just knowing which lever to pull, or like, is this a gut decision, or is this we really need to think about this? And I think like in the big picture, like we understand these things when it's like, I'm buying a house. Okay. I'm not going to make a gut decision over that. So I think sometimes the context lends itself to knowing which is which, but is this something that you feel like you've had to learn and develop over time? Or, have you kind of always had a proclivity for business and entrepreneurship and kind of like the macro side of things? Like, what's that look like for you?
Yeah, I think that's a excellent question, because as you were talking there, I was just really kind of reliving some moments. Like, I am naturally an aggressive decision maker, and so
me too.
So you have to really become very emotionally intelligent if you want to be a good, solid business owner, good boss, good coworker, and it's patience that I'm learning still. I feel like I'm better than I was 15 years ago, but it's definitely patience to learn those things and really decide, okay, when are we going to be aggressive, make some quick moves, because those are needed too, for sure, in business. But then when are we going to slow down a little bit and take our time?
And when you make mistakes, are you someone who, do you typically, and it's such a hard question to ask because there's no way to ask this without making it sound like, you're like, yeah, of course I move on from my mistakes. But I know for me, like, I'm an aggressive decision maker. I go with my gut a lot. And there's some mistakes I've made where I'm like, even to this day, I'm like, man, that was such a stupid decision. I really hurt myself in terms of like the long-term success of my business. And then there's other decisions where it was a bad decision and it's like, I just can't spend any time thinking about that. I bring this up because I think a lot of business owners, especially when they're newer to the business world, they put so much stake in making the perfect decision without understanding that you're going to be making these decisions every second of every day.
Yeah.
How do you typically respond when you make a bad decision?
Well, first and foremost, honestly, that's one of my almost daily prayers to God is help me make good quality decisions every moment of every day. Because as a business owner, absolutely, you're making decisions multiple times an hour, multiple times a minute sometimes. And so that's one thing that I constantly pray for is the wisdom to make those decisions, because I don't have time sometimes in the moment to say a prayer.
Yeah.
It's like, just help me through all these.
Yeah.
I think that as I've grown, as you go through repetition, you start to think, well, you can't, like you said, you can't really dwell too much on the mistakes. We could have a whole separate podcast, maybe a couple of podcasts on the failures that I've had in business.
Yeah.
And I think it was Mark Cuban that said, perfection is the enemy of profit. And those words come through my head quite often.
Yeah.
It's like because I'm super OCD too, which makes me a great restaurateur. But at the same time, in business decisions, it's like, okay, when are we going to like take all the time in the world, dial this in? And when are we sometimes just going to release something, and just see what sticks?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I think, when we talk about running a business, some of these things get so, I don't know if discarded is the right word, like knowing how to make right decisions, like knowing how to, like when to pause and when to press, like all of this stuff's very hard to quantify, or at least if someone's asking like, hey, how do I run a business? It's hard to then like share, like, here's what you're going to have to think about. But especially, I think it's, especially in terms of mistakes, you know, I the way I've heard it described, and you might like this analogy, is thinking of your business in terms of crystal balls and rubber balls, and decisions you're making. You know, ideally the ones that you mess up are rubber balls because you drop them and it bounces back up into your hand. The ones you don't want to drop are your crystal balls because in many cases there's no recovering from that. Great analogy. But I do like your comment though about, you know, I wish we had more time to talk about business failures, just because I feel like, especially, I don't know how much time you spend on social media, but we so love to really hone in on the successes. But I've been thinking about like another podcast, which I can't help myself apparently, but called Ugly Businesses. And it literally being all around like the really successful business owners, but like the really awful decisions that were made and why they thought they were the right decision. Or I haven't fleshed it out in my head, but this is actually the first time I've talked about this. But anyway, then again, maybe people wouldn't really care about listening to business failures.
I think that it's important to know, and you know, again, I listen to a lot of podcasts, listen to a lot of books. You hear extremely successful men and women talk about you've got to learn from the failure. You learn more from the failures than you do the wins. And so, absolutely, I've learned so many things over the many failures, many mistakes, you know, and sometimes they're little, sometimes they're a daily decision, sometimes they're a business failure. And when
you're running a business at the level you are, I say at the level in the sense of like you're running multitude of businesses, how do you like reconcile that with like control, or maybe control is not the right word. I mean, obviously you have different like aspirations and priorities and goals for each business. You mentioned you have your team that you rely on. I mean, going back to that first employee, and you've been in the restaurant industry for a while, so this isn't probably a newer conversation, but I mean, bringing on that first employee, like handing off control. I mean, a lot of people listening right now, they may not even have their first employee yet, and they may even be terrified of the idea of like, I can't trust them with that. I mean, talk to me a little bit about, you know, what's it look like relinquishing control and relying on other people for your business?
I think that's a great question because the one thing you have to come to terms with. So like I told you, I'm OCD. Like I am very particular about everything, you know, processes, everything down to the I's dotted and the T's crossed. The one thing you have to just come to terms with as a business owner that it's not going to be perfect. And so when you rely on that, you know, number one employee or number 10 employee or whatever it may be, you have to just kind of relinquish that control and just understand that it's really just never going to be perfect again. But again, it goes back to the phrase of perfection is the enemy of profit. So you're a one-man band, you're not going to be able to produce nearly as much as multiple people. And so when you come to terms with that, I think that it makes things easier. Of course, there's always those big mess ups by an employee.
Yeah.
That then you have to really sit there and think, you know what, if I was in that position, you know, I could have made not only that mistake, but I might have even added to that and made this other mistake, you know, that kind of tag team on with that. So you just have to put yourself in their shoes and know that those situations sometimes happen.
And sometimes those uh-ohs are really painful. There was a, I can't think of which one it was, but like a global, like cloud-based software. It was like a data management company, and they were managing data all over the world. One of their engineers was doing some kind of update to the software and accidentally deleted the whole database. Now, fortunately, it had been like printed on someone's hard drive or something like 6 days before.
The book Creative.
I don't remember the details about it.
It was actually Pixar.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, no. That is an example. I do know that story.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was for one of their films that they had been working on.
Yes.
This is one that I can't give a better example because I'm really bad, by the way, of like watching a YouTube video and then forgetting all the details of what I saw, or like I'll see someone in public and I'm like, hey, I loved your post you just made, and they're like, well, which one? And I'm like, well, now I don't remember which one it was. I just remember sitting there and being like, ooh, I really like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know the Pixar story. This one though, someone had made a backup like 6 days earlier, so it took like 6 days to get it transitioned back over. But it brought up the question of, should this person be fired? And the answer is either yes, because they made a huge mistake, or it's, well, now you have someone who really is experienced in knowing what not to do. So maybe they're an asset. I don't know. But, whenever your employees make mistakes, it's interesting listening to you talk about this, by the way, because I know a lot of people, when they're hesitant to give up control, when that employee makes the mistake, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, see, this is why I have to micromanage, because I can't trust them not to make stupid decisions or, whatever stuff you've probably heard before, honestly.
Yes. And on the note of micromanaging, that is one thing that I really was bad at in my 20s, into my 30s. And then as more experience, more time, working with, I've had as many as 25 employees, in a single business. And micromanaging is something you just gotta let go of, because you will, I don't know, I think you'll live a shorter life if you don't, because the blood pressure and anxiety of constantly having to be, micromanaging every little move. So that's something, that really is kind of I can actually sit and think about some particular times where I finally just relinquished. And it's a good feeling. Yeah,
I think about a customer I've had who she was like a home organizer. So like her skill set was really like what she brought to the table, like seeing the space and all this kind of stuff. And she has like maybe 8 or 9 employees. One of our conversations was, we have to free you up. Like you're at your capacity, which means you need to delegate. You need to hand this stuff off. And it was really funny, like those early conversations of her being like, well, no, like there's no way I can do that. Like they can't do it. And then like a year later, after she had been doing it, she was like, this was way better. Like, I wish I had done this earlier. But there's that friction, I think, as a business owner where, you put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it that you know how you want it to be done. And it can feel, I think understandably, we feel very protective over our business and even inviting other people into it.
For sure.
So you have 11, was it 11 businesses?
11 at least on the horizon. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So like when you think of like, are you thinking about like macro stuff like the economy, inflation? Like are these things things that get into part of like your decision making, or is it kind of like that's noise and I'm just like I'm very curious how you balance your aspirations with like, I mean, we're getting inundated constantly with conversations about all this stuff. I'm just curious, how do you navigate entrepreneurship with all the noise?
Yeah, I think that's it's important to know what the economy as a whole is doing, to sit and micro analyze each individual day, month, week, whatever it may be that the stock market's doing, or whatever you happen to pay attention to, I think is kind of a waste of energy, really. So I try to stay away from a ton of news, and I get some awesome daily emails that give me kind of a rundown of what's going on. But I was actually just listening to Grant Cardone book, which was the 10X Mentor, the second one that he wrote.
Yeah.
And he talks about the economy, like, make sure you're saving your money so that you can make some moves when things are down.
Yeah. And he's big on like using debt to like build up your equity and things like that. So that makes a lot of sense that he'd have a finger on the pulse with that.
But no, in general, you definitely have to know what's going on, because certain industries, of course, are more sensitive to those things. But in general, I'm always going to be thinking of the next business to start. And so then, of course, timing comes into it for sure. But my wife, I drive my wife a little crazy by, hey, guess what I thought of today?
Yeah.
and I am a man of action. Like when I come up with something, it's really hard to get it out of my head. So I'm either going to research it to the nth degree, or I'm just going to take action on it. And so that's sometimes an anxiety.
What fulfills you about all this? I mean, it's clearly there's something about starting and growing something that you seem to appreciate. I mean, I'm just very curious about, you're not just like an ideator, like, oh, it'd be cool if someone did this. Like you said it yourself, you're a man of action. I mean, what is it that drives you to keep doing this kind of stuff?
I think I just have a need in my life for some reason for new things, and I like to try to create new opportunities, obviously. And I have so many varied interests, as you heard from, fireworks to restaurants to, whatever the next thing is coming. I don't know. I'm going to need to now contemplate that a little bit more, because that's a really bad answer.
No, it's but I just was curious.
Yeah. I love new things. And I think that's going to be one thing that's going to be really cool with getting into building spec homes. Is I love to see development. I love to see progress. Love to see new things. And so building homes will be an awesome extension of that.
And something really interesting about this is it sounds like you don't just like new things for the sake of them being new, but there's this interesting inflection point with something that is exciting and new to you, but also has like a market fit to it. There's a guy on Reddit. I don't know if you ever get on Reddit at all. And again, I'm butchering. I tell you, I think of these examples and I can't think of specifics, but his whole thing is designing useless things. Like he has like at this point, pretty prolific social media account of his latest invention. Nothing anyone would ever buy. And I can't think of an example, unfortunately, but point being, I think there are people out there who are ideators, and they're innovators, not the right word. They love new ideas and they have a creative mind, but it doesn't always gel with, okay, now what's the format of how I take this to market? Or like, what does it look like to actually make money doing this? And it seems like that's something that naturally comes well to you, that you appreciate new things, but you're also thinking about like the actual business of the idea.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think probably everybody has a software idea in their head that they're like, hey, that would be awesome. Well, I have a couple, and one is in the works, a little bit smaller scale. One is huge scale, and it's things that I come across in my daily life. Like, why isn't this being done? And how can we do? What can we create to solve a problem? I mean, that's everybody's business model is what are we doing to solve a problem? And so I think that because I have my hands in so many different things, I come across a large amount of problems that need to be fixed, or things that are being done that aren't being done right. And so then I have this drive to want to, I don't know, innovate is maybe not the best word, but bring things to market that would make more sense, I guess.
How do you, when an idea dies, like when you start to think about it, you start to like put the legs on it, and then you look at it and you're like, this is ugly. And let's say it gets to the point where it's not like, okay, I'm going to ideate, I'm going to innovate on this, I'm going to create a new version, but you get to the point where you're like, I need to let this go. Do you do that easily, or I mean,
no, not easily for sure. Because and my wife will tell you this, when I come up with an idea, I fall in love with it, and I do. That's one thing as I grow and I learn is I need to not be emotionally attached, for sure, because that can be the death of anything, even if it's a good idea. But it goes on a list on my notepad on my phone. I'm like, okay, this one's gonna be bumped down the list now, and we're gonna table it for now, and I'm going to either have more financial means to, do it better and do it right from the get-go instead of starting small and trying to build it. Or we're going to tweak the idea and we're going to innovate a little bit more and come back to that.
It's interesting because I think about, I think a lot of people who are entrepreneurs who are listening can relate with this. I think sometimes you get so emotionally invested in the idea. And I think for many of us, and this is not to challenge anyone who's listening, but it might be a challenge. Many of us get into entrepreneurship not because of necessarily the idea, but because of all of the emotional energy that comes with, I'm an entrepreneur. I quit my job. Or I had a guy who I was giving some advice to, and he was like, I so badly want to be an entrepreneur. Like, I just think about it all the time. And I was like, Okay. So for him, I knew it wasn't an actual idea. It was this brand of entrepreneurship. And so we took it one step farther. I said, well, what is it about being an entrepreneur? Because I can think of, for me personally, some really awesome highs, but some also really freaking lows of like, how am I going to pay these bills? What am I doing? Sure. All this kind of stuff. Well, so I was curious and I asked, well, what is it about entrepreneurship that you love? Like, what do you think entrepreneurship is? And he was like, it's awesome. Like, you can just sleep as late as you want and no one tells you what to do. And I was like, okay, I don't know if I think that's immaturity is what that, I don't know if that's entrepreneurship, but in his case, it was the title, big E, entrepreneurship. It wasn't like the actual idea. So I think many of us get so emotionally involved in it when it's not even really the idea. It's, I have to succeed because I'm an entrepreneur now.
I think what the first thing that comes to mind when I hear that is that when you are an entrepreneur, you can be fired by a customer and that is your boss. Mm-hmm. And that is sometimes, again, it goes back to definitely in the restaurant business, but any business where I've brought people on to help out, it goes back to getting a bad review. Mm-hmm. Those things hit you to the core.
They do.
And man, they hurt. But you have to, again, kind of separate yourself from the emotion of it and start, and a lot of people, especially bad reviews, a lot of people will have emotion behind it. But you need to remember that if they have emotion behind it, that means they're passionate about it for some reason, whether it's a hatred or they actually love the business, but they're so disappointed in it. And so that's one thing I try to look at when I read a bad review. Is okay, what can we take from this? What positive can we take from this and learn from it? Even though maybe they're being a little extreme in some of their comments.
Yeah, you ruined my life. I'm like, I sell ice cream.
Right,
so.
right.
Yeah.
And so, but you can be fired by a customer at any moment. And hopefully a bad review ends up being one of those situations where they needed to get it out. They needed to, say it, type it, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And they don't mean I'm never coming back.
Yeah.
They just needed to get that off their chest and hopefully they'll come back.
This is such a great shift in kind. I hate that we're at the end of our conversation because this is like such a great like conversation point. So we'll just park here for a second, but it is really painful when you get fired by a customer. Because I know for me personally, I think it's definitely like justification. It's like, well, you as the customer, you didn't see what I was doing here, or like you just misunderstood, or what other the things are. But I was fired by a customer last year, and I realized after the fact that we were deeply misaligned on even what our relationship looked like. My business is very digital. It's very, we use a lot of different technology apps and things like that. And this was somebody who lived on a farm with no phone service and no internet and never wanted to have those things either. So from day one, we were misaligned. But my lack of experience in really, when you're selling to someone, you're also in a way validating if you should sell to them, which I didn't do. And so misaligned from day one. He eventually fired me, or rather we went our separate ways, but it was tough not to take it personal. Personal's not the right word. Like I wasn't like showing up at his house. Like, right. How could you?
Right.
But when you think about your business, you put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it. It's hard not to take it personal.
And I think of that one comment that you made was they misunderstood or whatever. That particular word just makes me remember that we didn't communicate it well.
Right.
If we're advertising something and someone is disappointed,
right,
there was something on our part that we didn't do well in explaining what the product was, what the service was, whatever it may be. And so, again, those are things that you have to take and learn from.
Yeah. And I nowadays, I try to explain those things. Like SEO is a really great example. We do SEO. And so I'll have a customer. I was on a call with a guy from New York on Friday, and he was like, "Hey, I'm nowhere on this list. I want to be number one on Google." He's calling me to say, "Hey, I want to hire you." Well, I could have very much taken the energy of him coming to me and being like, "Let's do it. Let's make it happen." But knowing that, I'm number one for good advice on a few different categories because I've been in business for 5 years and been slaving away on this thing. So rather than chase that opportunity, instead I dialed back and communicated, well, hey, just so you can know, there's nothing I can do that tomorrow you're going to be number one. There's probably not anything I can do in the next 3 months that's going to get you to number one, but there's a lot we can do to at least move you up that list and get you one step closer. So I have found it being valuable to communicate even at the risk of losing the sale to protect what could be a really great long-term customer.
For sure.
So,
yep. No, I think that's a great example for sure. Yep.
Jacob, this has been an awesome conversation. Naturally, we're like, at the end of it, I'm like, man, we need to have another conversation and keep this going.
I definitely need to come back.
For people who are listening and they want to connect with you in some way, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm working on that.
Okay.
I am actually creating a Frese Industries website. That way it's easier for all my brands to be in one place. But definitely Barnett Stariet, barnetts.com, or on social, Barnett Stariet. Frese Fireworks. Go like our page. Yeah. One thing we hadn't gotten into, Facebook hates explosives, so we don't get any chance to advertise and pay for leads. So go like our page on Frese Fireworks for sure. It'd
be a good opportunity for some SEO, by the way.
Yes, there you go.
Well, hey, I appreciate you so much. Thanks for coming on the show today. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, for our listeners, if you listened to our conversation and you enjoyed this episode, what the heck you waiting on? Click the subscribe or follow button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you are. Don't forget, if you want to support the podcast, you can do that at our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/goodadvice. And if you're a business, you want to advertise your business on the podcast, you can always reach out at blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. Hey, for those of you who support the show, thank you so much. I love the good advice we get to bring to everybody every single day. And that's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.